What if we were born without empathy? It started subtly. At first, no one really noticed. A man trips on a crowded New York sidewalk. No one stops. A woman screams on a late-night train. Not a head turns. A child cries at the mall. Arms outstretched alone. And the world walks on. At first glance, it looked like indifference. Rudeness. A product of urban fatigue. But something deeper was unraveling. Within days, emergency rooms across the country noticed something strange. Patients stared blankly at each other, unmoved by pain or panic. Social workers reported bizarre encounters. Survivors of domestic violence recounting their trauma with robotic calm, their loved ones failing to flinch. Even children who once cried when their pets died now shrugged at the sight of a dead bird. It wasn't mass depression. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't a cultural shift. It was empathy. Gone. Everywhere. Without warning. It wasn't just that people stopped expressing concern. It was as though the capacity itself had been erased, like a light bulb that had quietly burned out in every human brain. World leaders convened. Neuroscientists scrambled. Was it a disease? A neurological event? Some governments suspected bioterrorism. Others blamed rogue AI. But when newborns began showing the same signs, flat affect, absent compassion, the world faced a chilling truth. This wasn't temporary. This was evolution, or something like it. For the first time in human history, we were no longer a species of shared pain. And we didn't know what that meant. The very fabric of civilization had been stitched with threads of empathy, kindness, shame, love, guilt, all rooted in our ability to feel what others feel. Empathy was why we cried at funerals, why we cheered for underdogs, why we cared about justice, fairness, and dignity. Now, without warning, it was gone. Across the world, philosophers dug into dusty texts for answers. What was a human without empathy? Had we become something else? Or had we returned to something more primal? In schools, children no longer comforted their peers. In hospitals, nurses went through the motions without warmth. In politics, fiery debates were replaced by cold calculations. The fire of feeling had dimmed. Only function remained. The world didn't end. Not in an explosive apocalypse, but in a quiet, creeping shift. And for many, that was worse. Because the world looked the same. People still woke up, went to work, posted on social media. They bought groceries, they filed taxes, they made dinner. But the smiles were empty, the apologies rehearsed, the affection hollow. In homes, marriages began to fracture, not out of betrayal, but out of absence. Partners found themselves unable to care for each other's bad days. Parents looked at crying toddlers as though watching broken machines. Religions trembled. For millennia, empathy had been a cornerstone of faith. Love thy neighbor, turn the other cheek. Without it, sermons rang hollow. Confession lost meaning. Guilt faded. And yet, curiously, not everything fell apart. Some industries flourished. Defense companies, algorithmic trading. Some people thrived. Those once burdened by too much feeling. Emotional detachment became an asset. But what would happen to art, to justice, to human rights? As the world grappled with this strange mutation, a terrifying possibility emerged. What if empathy had always been the thing keeping us human? And now we had to live without it. In this new world, where no one could truly feel for another, the rules were changing, and soon, so would everything else. Before the rupture, before the strange erasure of feeling swept across humanity, we lived in a world built, almost invisibly, on empathy. It was so deeply woven into our lives that we rarely noticed it. Empathy wasn't a feature, it was a foundation. Consider how a baby's cry instantly draws a caregiver's attention, how a stranger's smile on a rainy day can soften your morning, how the pain of another person, even someone you've never met, can stir something inside you. These were not learned behaviors. They were reflexes born from millions of years of evolution. From the moment Homo sapiens emerged as a species, empathy was our superpower. Other animals had strength, speed, claws, or fangs. We had each other. We could look into another's eyes and sense danger. We could feel sorrow at a comrade's death. We could cooperate, not just because it was logical, but because it felt right. Empathy was why we gathered around fires to tell stories, why we buried our dead with care, why we painted caves and sang lullabies and created gods who cared whether we suffered. It was why we built hospitals, why we abolished slavery, why we created human rights. Empathy turned us into a species that could sacrifice for others, even without a clear benefit. A firefighter running into a burning building for a stranger, a soldier carrying a wounded friend, a nurse staying late after a 12-hour shift. These were not acts of logic. They were acts of feeling. But that feeling was more than moral. It was neurological. Modern neuroscience had uncovered astonishing truths about empathy. Deep inside our brains lived specialized neurons called mirror neurons. When we saw someone in pain, our brains lit up as if we were in pain. When someone laughed, our brain's pleasure centers responded. Empathy wasn't abstract. It was physical, electrical, chemical. It helped regulate behavior. Children with strong empathetic bonds developed better emotional regulation. Societies that nurtured empathy had lower crime, greater social trust, more robust democracies. From restorative justice to trauma-informed care, our most progressive innovations were rooted in one simple truth. Humans were built to care for each other. Technology, too, evolved in the orbit of empathy. Social media, for all its chaos, was originally designed to amplify connection. We shared photos of weddings and losses, birthdays and heartbreaks. We crowdfunded strangers' surgeries. We organized protests over injustices we had never personally experienced. We pressed digital hearts, not just as a habit, but as a gesture of shared experience. Even artificial intelligence began to flirt with synthetic empathy. Customer service bots were programmed to say, "I'm sorry to hear that." Language models were trained to comfort, to advise, to simulate human warmth. We were building machines to feel, or at least fake it, because we instinctively knew that emotion was essential. But empathy wasn't just good for others. It was good for us. Studies showed that those who practiced compassion regularly had lower levels of stress hormones, better cardiovascular health, longer lifespans. Empathy reduced tribalism, improved negotiation, healed trauma. It was the invisible glue holding 8 billion humans together on a fragile planet. And yet, even in this deeply interconnected, empathy-driven world, cracks were forming. There were growing pockets of numbness, desensitization, outrage fatigue, digital overstimulation. The modern world bombarded us with suffering at scale, wars, famines, floods, and our nervous system struggled to keep up. Some wondered, were we burning out? Could our empathy circuits, overused and underprotected, begin to fail? Meanwhile, advances in biotechnology began probing the very architecture of emotion. Gene editing, neuroenhancement, targeted hormone therapies, all promised to optimize the brain. Military programs explored ways to suppress emotional reactions in combat. Silicon Valley flirted with productivity drugs that dulled distraction, including feelings. And deep in research labs, whispers of empathy control emerged, not just in humans, but in AI. What if we could turn empathy on or off? What if we could eliminate the burden of feeling in high-stress jobs, high-stakes diplomacy, high-speed markets? It was speculative, experimental, ethically murky. Until one day, it wasn't. Because something happened, no one yet knows how or why, that turned speculation into reality. Empathy, as a species-wide trait, disappeared, and all that remained were the memories of a world once warm, once deeply human, now replaced by a chilling calm. The question was no longer why it happened. The question was, what now? Because when a civilization loses its heart, it doesn't die with a bang. It dies with silence. It didn't come like a storm, it came like a whisper, and no one was listening. The first real sign arrived in a delivery room in Berlin. A newborn girl, healthy by every metric, didn't respond to her mother's tears. Her eyes moved, her limbs flailed, but her face remained eerily still. The nurses chalked it up to exhaustion, but over the next few days, dozens of similar cases emerged. Infants who cried from hunger, but not from sadness, who recoiled from cold, but not from the pain of others. No eye contact, no imitation, no shared emotion. By the end of the week, pediatricians across continents were sounding the alarm. Something had changed, not in culture, but in cognition. And it wasn't just the babies. In Tokyo, a subway accident left a man pinned between the train and the platform. Dozens stood nearby, filming, commenting, but no one stepped forward. The emergency button was pressed, eventually. But the hesitation, the passivity, was jarring. Footage spread online, provoking outrage, yet the outrage was hollow. Commenters mocked, criticized, and moved on. No one truly cared. Not even the witnesses. In Sao Paulo, a building fire trapped a family on the upper floors. Firefighters arrived promptly, but neighbors, once the backbone of Brazilian communal culture, simply watched. Some live-streamed, some turned away. Few wept. Meanwhile, in Chicago, police noticed a shift in criminal behavior. Burglars no longer avoided homes with children inside. Scammers targeted the elderly without remorse. Domestic disputes ended not in shouting matches, but in calculated silence. Something primal was missing. At first, the pattern was brushed off as coincidence, but neurologists began examining patients who displayed this emotional void. Brain scans revealed a disturbing commonality: the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a region associated with emotional regulation and empathy, was showing anomalous inactivity. Mirror neuron activity was reduced. Oxytocin levels had plummeted. Even more shocking, this was not caused by trauma, illness, or drugs. It was biological. Baseline. Geneticists ran comparison tests. Something subtle had shifted in the population genome. A deletion, a mutation? No clear culprit. But the evidence was undeniable. New generations were being born without the emotional architecture that had defined humanity for millennia. Was this evolution? A spontaneous leap forward or backward? Religious leaders offered wildly different interpretations. Some called it divine punishment. Others, divine mercy. A new phase of consciousness. Cults emerged claiming that empathy had been a lie all along, a crutch used to manipulate. Feelings are chains, they chanted. Now we are free. Governments panicked. Policy debates broke out in parliaments and congresses around the world. Should emotional regulation be mandatory? Should synthetic empathy drugs be developed? Could schools adapt to teach morality without emotion? AI labs, sensing opportunity, proposed virtual empathy assistants, digital companions that could simulate compassion and guide behavior. But without real emotion behind the interface, most users found them uncanny, or simply boring. As weeks turned to months, the scale of the change became clearer. It wasn't just some people, it was everyone. From infants to elders, from billionaires to farmers. The capacity to feel with another was vanishing. And with it, the world began to shift. In homes, parents cared for their children out of obligation, not affection. They fed, bathed, and educated, but no lullabies were sung. No bedtime stories read with warmth. Children grew up smart, efficient, but emotionally sterile. In workplaces, collaboration remained, but only because it served mutual interest. No one brought cupcakes for birthdays. No one stayed late to help a colleague. Leadership became purely transactional. Politics lost its moral fervor. Campaigns stopped pretending to feel your pain. Instead, they promised raw benefits, tax cuts, security, power. Charities collapsed. Humanitarian efforts withered. Why help strangers when you couldn't feel their suffering? And yet, the trains still ran. Markets still opened. Cities still glowed with electric light. But something else flickered dimly in the background, a quiet dread, because people began to ask themselves, If I cannot feel your pain, if I cannot rejoice in your joy, if I cannot care even when I want to, what am I? What is the point? And no one, not scientists, not philosophers, not priests, had an answer. Not yet. But deeper questions were brewing, and the first wave of consequences was just beginning to ripple outward. Civilization had stepped onto new terrain, unfamiliar, cold, and unmapped, and the path forward would be anything but straight. In the months that followed the global loss of empathy, the shock settled into a strange stillness. Not panic, not chaos, but a mechanical kind of adjustment. Humanity, in all its ingenuity, did what it had always done when faced with disruption. It adapted. But this time, something felt different. Something vital was missing from the way the world responded. The urgency was there, the action was swift, but the why was gone. In boardrooms and parliament halls, decision-makers moved quickly to prevent collapse. Economic policies were revised with brutal pragmatism. Safety nets were streamlined, not out of compassion, but to avoid the instability of public unrest. Welfare programs weren't defended with rhetoric about human dignity. They were justified with graphs and forecasts about consumer spending. Markets, surprisingly, did not crash. In fact, some sectors flourished. Tech companies surged ahead, their products designed to optimize efficiency without regard for human emotion. Automation accelerated, not just because it was cheaper, but because now human labor came with fewer social expectations. No need for break rooms, birthday bonuses, or HR workshops on emotional intelligence. Workers clocked in, completed tasks, clocked out. No drama, no camaraderie. Customer service industries pivoted overnight. Gone were the days of warm greetings and empathetic tones, replaced by rapid, robotic interactions. Surveys showed no drop in satisfaction. People no longer expected kindness. They wanted results, and they got them. Just fix it became the new golden rule. Education transformed with stunning speed. Classrooms, once centers of emotional development, turned sterile. Teachers taught content, not character. Peer support evaporated. Bullying didn't escalate. It became obsolete. Why target someone emotionally when emotions held no currency? The entertainment industry saw a curious shift. Comedies faltered. Romantic dramas lost their audience. Viewers, unable to relate to fictional emotion, turned to content driven by novelty, shock, or logic. Puzzle-based narratives rose in popularity. Complex science fiction replaced sentimental coming-of-age tales. Empathy, once the beating heart of storytelling, was now a foreign language. Religions fractured. Some denominations collapsed outright, unable to inspire congregants who no longer felt awe, guilt, or love. Others doubled down, focusing on ritual and doctrine over feeling. Spirituality persisted in form, but not in spirit. Meanwhile, public health data revealed startling trends. Rates of depression plummeted, not because people were happier, but because they no longer registered sadness in the same way. Anxiety disorders fell, as concern for the future became a cognitive exercise, not an emotional burden. Suicide rates dropped sharply. Death had become a fact, not a fear. Mourning rituals faded. Funerals became brief, logistical events. On the surface, the world seemed calmer. Fewer protests, less crime of passion. Social media, once a landscape of outrage and inspiration, flattened into a landscape of transaction. Arguments remained, but they were cold, data-driven, strategic. Cancel culture dissolved. No one cared enough to be outraged. Algorithms adapted accordingly. Content became sharper, faster, but devoid of emotional resonance. Yet in this strange new order, certain warnings began to emerge. Soft and scattered at first, then slowly more urgent. Child development specialists raised red flags. Infants were growing without the instinct to bond. Eye contact was rare. Facial mimicry vanished. The foundational building blocks of human trust, those first unspoken exchanges between baby and caregiver, were eroding. Sociologists noted a decline in community participation. Volunteerism dried up. Acts of random kindness became statistical anomalies. Neighborhoods grew quiet. Not dangerous, just detached. And then there were the relationships. Romantic partnerships turned transactional. Dating apps adapted, now filtering based on compatibility metrics, not shared values or emotional connection. Marriages held on, but affection became perfunctory. Conflict resolution, once emotional terrain, became legalistic negotiation. The warmth of love was gone. Only the logic of companionship remained. Some tried to resist the tide. Artists continued to paint, to write, to perform, but found their work met with blank stares. Museums became quiet. Music lost its ability to move. Tears became rare. Laughter, rarer still. And yet, life continued. Trains still ran on time. Dinners were still cooked. Contracts were still signed. But beneath the machinery of daily existence, something was cracking. Not visible, not loud, but deep. Because humans were functioning, yes, but they were no longer living in the way they once had. They were surviving. And the voices warning of long-term collapse, of deeper, slower decay, were beginning to ask the unspoken question: can a civilization survive without compassion? And if it can, should it? As the years stretched on, the world began to reveal the deep, often invisible consequences of a humanity stripped of empathy. What at first seemed like orderly adaptation gradually morphed into cracks fracturing the foundations of society, the environment, and even our own biology. Without empathy, humans lost more than warmth. They lost a compass guiding moral choice and communal responsibility. The ripple effects were profound and far-reaching. The environment was among the earliest casualties. Conservation efforts, which had once inspired global cooperation and sacrifice, withered. The intricate dance between humanity and nature, once choreographed by shared care and concern for future generations, turned cold and mechanical. Protected species vanished faster, forests shrank, and oceans grew quieter. Climate accords stalled. Nations prioritized short-term economic gains with ruthless efficiency, unburdened by guilt or remorse. The planet, a living ecosystem intertwined with human empathy, felt the sting of abandonment. This environmental apathy was mirrored by a geopolitical landscape transformed by calculated detachment. Diplomatic alliances no longer relied on trust or mutual understanding. Treaties became mere transactions. Strategic interests dominated, and with empathy's absence, the incentives for compromise eroded. Borders hardened. Arms races intensified. The nuclear threat, once tempered by human horror at its potential devastation, re-emerged as cold strategy. Global conflicts simmered beneath the surface, their fires fueled not by passion or ideology, but by pure calculus. Social cohesion, the glue of communities, faced slow dissolution. Without empathy, the invisible social contracts frayed. Trust became transactional, fragile. Neighbors stopped knowing neighbors. The once rich tapestry of cultural exchange dulled into isolated threads. Civic participation plummeted. Voting, once an act of hope or defiance, became routine. Public discourse shifted into data points and polls, devoid of passionate engagement. Social movements lost momentum. The power to inspire collective action dimmed without the spark of shared feeling. At an individual level, the psychological toll unfolded in paradoxical ways. People were less anxious, less prone to depression in traditional terms, but an increasing number reported feelings of emptiness and meaninglessness. Without empathy, connection to others became intellectualized, sterile. Loneliness surged, not the loneliness of isolation, but the deeper ache of emotional vacancy. Parenting, once a source of intimate bonding and growth, became a set of instructions and checklists. Children grew into adults who knew love as a concept, but never as a lived experience. Generations cycled through this emotional void, raising fears about the future of human identity itself. Medical science confronted a new challenge. Without empathy, caregiving professions suffered. Hospitals operated with technical precision but lacked human touch. Patient outcomes stagnated. Rehabilitation, therapy, and mental health treatment struggled because healing often depended on the provider's ability to feel with the patient. Compassion fatigue became a literal impossibility. There was no compassion left to fatigue. Even the legal system grew colder. Courts became arenas of cold logic, with verdicts decided on facts and precedents, stripped of mercy or mitigation. Justice lost its humanity, becoming a series of transactions balancing rights and punishments without ethical nuance. Philosophers and ethicists grappled with this new reality. If empathy was removed, what anchored morality? Without shared feeling? Was ethics merely a code of conduct, enforced externally, but lacking internal motivation? Could a society thrive when its members operated purely on rational self-interest? Some thinkers posited that empathy was the social glue that made cooperation beyond kin possible. Without it, civilization might survive structurally, but lose its soul. Biologically, the story was no less bleak. Emerging research showed that the absence of empathy altered hormone balances, immune responses, and brain plasticity. Humans evolved into creatures more efficient, but less adaptable emotionally. The feedback loops that once fostered resilience, trust, care, forgiveness, broke down. Yet, amid this bleakness, new forms of order emerged. Some argued that humanity was entering a post-empathy phase, a new kind of existence where logic, data, and structure replaced emotion and narrative. Cities reorganized into modular, optimized units. Social contracts became explicit, enforced through surveillance and algorithms. In some ways, the world became cleaner, more predictable. But at what cost? The question haunted every corner of this cold world. Was survival enough? Or did humanity need something more? Empathy, connection, and care to truly live? As this chapter of history unfolded, the absence of empathy was no longer a strange anomaly, but a defining feature of existence, reshaping everything from how we govern, to how we love, to how we understand ourselves. And in this stark new landscape, the seeds of potential renewal, or ultimate collapse, quietly took root. Empathy, that mysterious human capacity to feel, understand, and resonate with the emotions of others, has fascinated scientists, philosophers, and poets alike for centuries. But what is empathy really? How does it emerge from the complex architecture of our brains? And crucially, what happens when it disappears? To unravel this, we must venture into the labyrinth of neuroscience, psychology, and biology, exploring the delicate networks that bind us emotionally to one another. At its core, empathy is a biological process, hardwired into our brains. It's more than just sympathy or kindness. It's a neural mechanism that allows us to experience a shadow of another person's feelings. When your friend stubs their toe and you wince, that is empathy at work, a cascade of electrical signals mimicking their pain in your own brain. Central to this process are the so-called mirror neurons, discovered in the 90s by researchers studying monkeys. These neurons mirror the actions and emotions of others, firing both when an individual performs an action and when they observe another doing the same. In humans, mirror neurons are believed to underlie our ability to imitate, learn socially, and crucially, empathize. But mirror neurons are only part of the story. Empathy relies on a complex network involving regions like the anterior insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. These areas process emotional pain, social cognition, and decision-making. Hormones and neurotransmitters like oxytocin, often called the love hormone, and vasopressin modulate social bonding and trust. Together, these systems enable humans not only to recognize others' emotions, but to feel them deeply. Now, imagine a disruption to this intricate machinery. What if the mirror neuron system was impaired, the flow of oxytocin diminished, or the connectivity between emotional centers weakened? The result would be a profound erosion of empathy, a dulling of the human emotional palate. This isn't just theoretical. Certain neurological conditions offer a window into empathy's disappearance. Psychopaths, for example, exhibit reduced activity in brain areas responsible for empathy and moral reasoning. Autism spectrum disorders can affect social cognition in complex ways, sometimes impairing empathic responses. Brain injuries to the frontal lobe can similarly diminish emotional capacity. However, the hypothetical scenario where all humans lose empathy simultaneously is unprecedented and challenges existing scientific understanding. How could such a global shift occur? One plausible hypothesis involves a combination of genetic mutation and environmental triggers affecting the expression of key empathy-related genes. Epigenetic factors, chemical modifications that regulate gene activity, might alter brain development in ways that suppress emotional networks. Alternatively, a novel neurotoxin or pathogen could selectively impair empathic circuits. Cutting-edge research in quantum biology hints at even stranger possibilities. Some scientists speculate that consciousness and emotional resonance may be linked to quantum processes in the brain, microtubules within neurons, entanglement phenomena, or quantum coherence. While highly controversial and not widely accepted, if these theories bear fruit, they could explain how subtle, systemic disruptions might alter empathy on a fundamental level. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence offers a double-edged sword. AI systems can simulate empathetic responses using natural language processing and behavioral algorithms, but they lack genuine feeling. These simulations can help fill the empathy void, guiding social interactions, providing companionship, even moderating disputes, but they raise profound ethical questions. Can empathy be truly replicated, or is it intrinsically human? At a cellular level, the absence of empathy might influence more than behavior. Neurochemical imbalances affect stress responses, immune function, and neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt. Chronic emotional detachment could lead to increased inflammation and cognitive decline. The mind and body are inseparable. Losing emotional connection may hasten biological deterioration. In sum, empathy is a dynamic, multifaceted phenomenon, a dance of neurons, chemicals, hormones, and perhaps even quantum events. Its disappearance is not just a social crisis, it is a biological catastrophe, unraveling the very threads that connect us. Yet, understanding the science offers a glimmer of hope. If empathy depends on identifiable mechanisms, could it be restored? Could technology, medicine, or social innovation reignite the dormant circuits? Could future generations relearn to feel with one another? These questions remain open, but one truth stands clear. Empathy is not merely a sentimental luxury. It is a fundamental biological imperative, the neural symphony that enables us to live not as isolated individuals, but as interconnected beings. And when that symphony fades, the silence it leaves is deafening. For years, humanity had functioned in a new state of emotional silence, efficient, orderly, detached. But beneath the surface, cracks deepened. The absence of empathy, initially masked by adaptation, soon triggered cascading crises that no amount of logic or technology could contain. The first shockwaves struck social institutions. Schools, once places of growth and emotional development, became arenas of cold instruction. Without empathy, bullying didn't spark outrage. It simply happened, unnoticed and unaddressed. Children learned to suppress feelings they never understood. Rates of anxiety and depression were puzzlingly low, but so too was resilience. The young, isolated emotionally, struggled with motivation and purpose. Dropout rates climbed as classrooms became prisons of mechanical routine. Healthcare systems faltered in unexpected ways. Medical professionals, deprived of compassion, operated with clinical detachment. Patients reported feeling like objects rather than people. Recovery slowed. Mental health treatments became ineffective. The human element of healing, reassurance, encouragement, empathy, was gone. Hospitals faced higher rates of medical errors and burnout, ironically caused not by overfeeling, but by the stark absence of it. Families fractured. Relationships dissolved quietly. Divorce rates soared as spouses felt like roommates rather than partners. Parenting became a checklist rather than a loving bond. Children grew emotionally stunted, lacking the foundational trust and attachment crucial for healthy adult life. The economy, while initially stable, started to show signs of strain. Consumer confidence waned as people lost connection to the brands, the stories, and the communities that once inspired loyalty. Corporate cultures became transactional. Innovation slowed. Creativity needs emotional engagement, and without it, the spark died. Automation expanded, replacing not just jobs, but human interaction. Inequality deepened as the marginalized, lacking social support, fell through the cracks. Politically, the world entered a period of unprecedented instability. Without empathy, diplomacy became a zero-sum game. Negotiations hardened, alliances fractured, and international cooperation waned. Rising nationalism and isolationism replaced shared ideals. Governments resorted to surveillance and control to maintain order. Civil unrest surged, not fiery protests, but cold, calculated disruptions. Radical groups, exploiting the emotional void, grew in number and influence. Ideologies became dogmatic and ruthless, fueled not by passion, but by ruthless logic. Environmental collapse accelerated. With no collective concern for the planet's future, policies favored short-term gain. Natural disasters multiplied, exacerbated by climate change and habitat destruction. Without empathy, the suffering of animals, indigenous communities, and future generations was irrelevant. Ecosystems collapsed silently. The planet itself seemed to mourn a loss humanity could no longer perceive. Amid the chaos, mental health crises took on new, perplexing forms. Paradoxically, widespread emotional numbness birthed a deep existential despair. People reported feeling disconnected from themselves as well as others. Cases of dissociation, apathy, and nihilism spiked. Substance abuse and self-harm increased as individuals sought to feel something, anything. In technology, AI and robotics filled the emotional void but also deepened it. Machines simulated care and concern, but their responses were algorithmic. Humans interacted more with screens than with skin. Virtual realities offered escapes, but isolated users further from genuine connection. The boundary between authentic experience and simulation blurred dangerously. Most alarming was the growing fragmentation of identity and purpose. Without empathy, the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of life lost meaning. Art, literature, and music declined. Cultural production slowed. Philosophy and spirituality struggled to find footing in a world where feeling itself was diminished. In this storm of loss and disconnection, small pockets of resistance emerged. Underground communities sought to preserve empathy through shared rituals, mindfulness, and emotional training. Scientists raced to understand and reverse the biological causes. Religious groups doubled down on compassion teachings. Yet these efforts faced overwhelming inertia. The world stood at a crossroads, a civilization sustained by cold calculation and efficiency but teetering on the edge of collapse. The crisis was not sudden or spectacular, but slow, grinding, and deeply unsettling. A machine without oil, a body without blood. Because empathy was not just an emotion, it was the lifeblood of humanity. And as it drained away, the question loomed larger than ever. Could we survive this void? Or was this the beginning of the end? In the midst of a world emptied of empathy, where the machinery of society churned cold and mechanical, a flicker of resistance began to glow. Humanity, though seemingly stripped of its heart, refused to surrender fully to this numbness. Across the globe, individuals, scientists, artists, and leaders began daring experiments, desperate quests to reclaim what was lost. At the forefront were the neuroscientists, armed with breakthroughs in brain imaging, gene therapy, and neurostimulation. They embarked on ambitious projects to revive the dormant empathy circuits. Trials using transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, targeted the prefrontal cortex, the brain's empathy hub, with mixed results. Some patients showed sparks of emotional response, fleeting but hopeful. Meanwhile, gene editing tools like CRISPR offered tantalizing promises of correcting the subtle genetic switches believed to suppress empathy, though ethical dilemmas clouded these efforts. Parallel to medical science, AI researchers raced to build synthetic empathy, machines not only programmed to respond with, "I understand," but capable of learning, adapting, and perhaps even experiencing rudimentary emotional states. Robots equipped with emotional recognition algorithms began assisting in caregiving, education, and therapy. Their presence brought moments of comfort, a pale reflection of genuine human warmth, but also a growing debate about dependency on artificial feeling. Culturally, grassroots movements flourished. Underground communities formed empathy circles, gathering to share stories, listen deeply, and practice radical presence. Mindfulness and meditation practices surged as people sought ways to reconnect with their own inner emotional lives. Art and music experienced a renaissance of subtlety, focusing on minimalism and abstract expression to bypass the intellectual barriers left by emotional loss. Politically, some governments initiated radical reforms, recognizing that traditional structures is no longer inspired loyalty or compassion. New social contracts emerged, emphasizing shared responsibility, enforced by algorithms designed to simulate fairness and justice. In some experimental zones, universal basic income and community governance models replaced transactional politics, aiming to foster cooperation beyond cold self-interest. On the ethical frontier, biohackers pushed boundaries, experimenting with psychoactive compounds that could temporarily restore emotional sensitivity. Some reported intense, sometimes overwhelming experiences, a rush of feelings both beautiful and painful, a reminder of what had been lost. But these solutions were far from scalable or safe. Amid these efforts, a controversial movement gained traction: the emotional revivalists. Advocates argued for a new kind of empathy, one not rooted in biological instinct, but in conscious choice and cultural construction. They championed education systems designed to teach empathy as a skill, using virtual reality to simulate experiences of others, and social contracts built on explicit emotional agreements. Could empathy be re-engineered, learned, and sustained without its original neurological roots? Resistance came from skeptics who warned against chasing ghosts. Some feared that reviving empathy could unleash emotional chaos, irrationality, and vulnerability once again. Others questioned whether synthetic or culturally constructed empathy could ever replace the genuine biological experience. Despite doubts, the human spirit's drive to connect remained undeniable. People formed support groups, therapy collectives, and online forums where emotions, raw and fragile, were practiced like endangered languages. Small acts of kindness, though rare, became revolutionary gestures. Sharing a smile, a touch, a word of comfort, once instinctive, now required effort and intention. Technological innovations blurred the lines between biology and machine. Neural implants capable of modulating emotional states were tested. Social media platforms evolved into curated emotional ecosystems, designed to encourage empathy through carefully crafted narratives and interactive storytelling. These digital tools sought to rekindle the dormant circuits by simulating emotional engagement at scale. The question that haunted every effort was this: can a species relearn to feel after forgetting? Can empathy, once lost, be reclaimed? Or is it a fragile gift, gone forever? Amid uncertainty, the small victories inspired hope. Moments of genuine connection, a doctor comforting a patient, A teacher inspiring a student, a stranger offering aid, flickered like stars in the night. They reminded humanity that beneath the numbness, the capacity for empathy still lingered, waiting to be awakened. The fight to reclaim empathy was not merely about restoring feeling, it was about reclaiming identity, meaning, and the very essence of what it meant to be human. In the cold world left behind by empathy's disappearance, these brave attempts illuminated a path forward, fragile, uncertain, but alive with possibility. The world had changed in ways few could have imagined. Empathy, once the invisible thread weaving humanity together, was now a scarce resource, flickering dimly in isolated pockets or replaced by artificial proxies. Yet, amid the emotional winter, a new dawn began to rise, a future not defined by what was lost, but by what could be built anew. This future was neither bleak nor utopian. It was complex, paradoxical, and profoundly human in its uncertainty. Without empathy as a natural force, societies began to explore alternative foundations for connection and cooperation. One such foundation was logic, pure, unclouded rationality. In a world where emotions faltered, reason became the compass guiding decisions, governance, and social interaction. AI-driven governance systems took root, processing vast data sets to allocate resources, mediate disputes, and plan urban life with precision. These systems operated without bias or passion, but their cold fairness gained wary acceptance as the best path forward. Yet logic alone proved insufficient. Humans craved meaning, narrative, and belonging. In response, new cultural frameworks emerged, constructed communities bonded by shared values, goals, or interests rather than emotional ties. Virtual reality became a common space where people gathered to create, collaborate, and experience collective stories. These digital realms offered immersive simulations of connection, sometimes so vivid that participants momentarily transcended the emotional void. Philosophers and ethicists grappled with the concept of post-empathy morality. Could ethics be decoupled from feeling? Could a society base justice and compassion on conscious choice rather than instinct? Experimental education programs taught empathy as a skill, blending neuroscience, psychology, and technology to cultivate understanding and care through deliberate practice. Meanwhile, biotechnology advanced rapidly. Neural enhancements and implants enabled selective emotional activation, allowing individuals to choose when and how to engage empathically. These empathy switches were controversial. Some embraced them as tools for revival. Others feared they reduced authentic feeling to mechanical toggles. Politically, the loss of natural empathy reshaped international relations. States formed coalitions not on shared emotions, but on aligned interests and mutual benefit, enforced by transparent contracts and monitoring technologies. Conflicts still arose, but were often resolved through data-driven negotiation and deterrence rather than passion-fueled violence. The environment, once abandoned, became a shared project driven by rational stewardship and long-term planning. Artificial ecosystems were created to replace damaged ones. Resource use was optimized globally, not from guilt, but from survival pragmatism. On a personal level, relationships adapted. Love and friendship took new forms, less spontaneous, but no less valued. Companionship became a conscious choice and negotiated contract. People learned to communicate clearly, prioritizing respect and cooperation over instinctual affection. Yet, even in this reimagined world, shadows remained. Critics argued that without true empathy, humanity risked becoming hollow, intelligent but disconnected, efficient but alienated. The question lingered. Could synthetic or learned empathy truly replace the deep biological feeling that once bound us? Despite doubts, this new dawn was a testament to human resilience and creativity. Out of loss emerged innovation. Out of emptiness, new meanings took shape. The story of humanity continued, not as a simple extension of the past, but as a bold experiment in redefinition, In this future beyond empathy, the essence of being human was not discarded but transformed, an invitation to explore the depths of reason, the heights of imagination, and the courage to connect in new, uncharted ways. The journey was far from over. As we stand at the close of this journey, through a world devoid of empathy, the question emerges with renewed urgency. What does empathy truly mean for our future? The story we've explored, a civilization stripped of its capacity to feel with one another, forces us to confront the fragile, intricate bond that defines what it means to be human. Empathy is often taken for granted, dismissed as a soft skill or a sentimental luxury. Yet, as we've seen, it is the neural symphony that orchestrates cooperation, compassion, and connection. It enables us to transcend our individual perspectives and embrace the shared human experience. Without it, society becomes a machine of cold calculation, efficient yet hollow. The scenarios painted in this exploration reveal both the vital necessity of empathy and the terrifying consequences of its absence. Empathy is not merely about kindness or emotion. It is the foundation of morality, culture, and social cohesion. It fuels the arts, inspires justice, and sustains mental health. Its disappearance precipitates a world where survival replaces living and function replaces meaning. But there is hope, woven throughout this narrative. Even in the darkest moments of emotional drought, humanity's indomitable spirit shines through. The attempts to reclaim empathy through science, technology, culture, and conscious effort demonstrate our relentless drive to connect and care. We learn that empathy can be cultivated, nurtured, and perhaps even restored, though never taken for granted. This future, however uncertain, invites us to reflect on our present. It challenges us to cherish empathy not only as an innate gift, but as a responsibility. In an era of rapid technological advancement, social upheaval, and global crises, empathy remains the compass guiding us through complexity and conflict. Moreover, the loss of empathy reminds us that progress devoid of feeling is incomplete. Scientific breakthroughs, economic growth, and political power hold little value if they fail to enhance the human condition in its fullest sense. Empathy anchors progress in meaning, ensuring that our actions uplift rather than isolate. As we contemplate what lies ahead, we face a choice: to let empathy erode under pressures of modern life, or to embrace it as the core of our collective evolution. This choice is not abstract. It is embodied in daily acts, listening deeply, practicing compassion, educating hearts as well as minds, designing technology that amplifies connection rather than replaces it. The question, what if we were born without empathy, is not just a speculative nightmare. It is a mirror reflecting our vulnerabilities and values. It compels us to safeguard empathy as an essential human resource, one that sustains relationships, communities, and the planet itself. Ultimately, empathy is more than feeling. It is the essence of shared humanity. It transforms strangers into neighbors, strangers' pain into personal concern, and individual lives into a tapestry of mutual support. Without it, we lose the thread that binds us, unraveling the fabric of civilization. So, as this story concludes, we are left with an invitation to recognize empathy's power, nurture it in ourselves and others, and build a future where connection thrives, not by default, but by deliberate choice. Because in the end, to be human is to feel with one another. And that may be the greatest gift we hold. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into a world without empathy, a world that challenges everything we think we know about connection, compassion, and what it truly means to be human. If this exploration made you think or feel differently about the role empathy plays in your life and in our society, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the unexpected. Until then, remember, empathy isn't just a feeling, it's the bridge that keeps us together. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and I'll see you in the next video.